Hello, you're here with Kevin and Brandon on Times with Kevin and Brandon. Today I'm going to discuss electronic music, dance music, and the rave culture. Now let's get into electronic music. A lot of the beginnings began with synthesizers being first used in the 60s and early 70s, and maybe even before then. But it was artists like Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream, both hailing from Germany, who really epitomized it at that time, and that would go on to influence DJs in Chicago and Detroit, both places creating house music and techno music respectively. Now, the music that was made out of Chicago and Detroit didn't experience much success in the US at first, but when it went overseas, it experienced a lot of success, particularly in England and Germany. Now, when the wall came down in Germany, there were a lot of open warehouse spaces that weren't being used, and that really gained a lot of momentum for techno parties, which we would then call raves. But the term rave wasn't coined until 1989 during the second summer of love in the UK, and that was what the media described it as. Because at this time, acid house was becoming all the craze in England, and there was a lot of mainstream artists who were inspired by the movement, even such as Robert Smith. And it was in the early 90s that some of these artists began to experience mainstream success. Even in the US, with songs like Rhythm is a Dancer, I've Got the Power by Snap, and a couple others, but it really didn't hit the US as hard. In Europe, dance music was very acceptable. Yes, it was. And you can still hear it quite often in a lot of European countries. And that is where the massive raves actually started, was in Europe. But in the US, it was still very underground. A lot of underground raves were still going on, like, illegal parties that were held in the middle of nowhere, or a warehouse where you would have to call the info line and get the location on the day of or the night of, even. And, it just seemed like that raves were just a fad that passed by, just like a fleeting fad, so to speak. But over the years, there would be a couple more flares of electronic music in US mainstream. And it wasn't until the summer of 2006 that I believe it really started to break with Cascades Every Time We Touch, because 3 years later, over the next 3 years, electronic music would start to gain momentum in the US, and David Guetta would epitomize it right there in 2009 with Sexy Bitch with Akon. And from there, the EDM craze began. Now, did the EDM craze kill the rave culture? That is very debated. You see, I was a raver back in 2006, 7, and 8 before the big explosion of EDM, and I knew who David Guetta was at that time, but I only knew him for a couple songs that they would spin at raves in a warehouse that I often went to in downtown Phoenix, and that was all I knew of him. And then when I saw him on MTV, I was like, what the fuck? Seriously? This guy is on MTV now? Because electronic music wasn't very prevalent in mainstream, but I do see how the mainstream of pop and hip hop were gravitating more and more to that sound over the course of 2006 to 2009. Now, I am a diehard electronic music fan. I'm even an electronic music artist. You can see it on my YouTube channel here. Just go to my releases and you'll see that I have various releases of techno and ambient. But besides the point, did EDM kill the rave culture? Or is the rave culture still dying? Or is it stronger than it's ever been? You see, the rave culture principles are DIY, do it yourself. Very cut down, very stripped down, and doing everything, basically just doing everything yourself and doing it independently. And a lot of people, even such as deadmau5, disapprove of the pop EDM that we hear on the radio from the likes of Calvin Harris and Marshmello. And I'm very mixed about, very ambivalent about how EDM had an effect on the rave culture. Yeah, it's cool that I got to see my subculture become popular culture, but it got so commercialized, in my opinion, and it became generic over time. And I do respect David Guetta and I do respect Marshmello, but I don't exactly approve of that music either. That kind of dance music, it's just not my forte. I mean, I'm a techno artist and I've always loved trance and such. And I believe that rave music, that true rave music, will always be underground, and sometimes it'll have a flare in mainstream, because I don't consider Marshmello, David Guetta, Calvin Harris to be rave music. I just don't. I consider deadmau5 to be more so, and I consider Paul Van Dyk and even Armin van Buuren to some degree as rave music. And I always loved rave music because when I was young, when I went to raves, I felt a unity like I'd never felt before. And it was a good experience, even though it wasn't the healthiest thing, I will admit, but it did introduce me to electronic music, and it became a lifelong passion for me as an artist. And it wasn't until at age 24 when I got right that I realized I had a very genuine and solid love for electronic music, because before I was always in rock bands and such, but I always attended raves, and I've actually been to more raves than concerts, believe it or not. And I love electronic music, and I have even gotten a lot of books regarding the rave culture, such as Rave On and The Underground is Massive, and Daft Punk is another one that's influenced me, and Daft Punk are the only artists that I really own 100% who could be considered pop EDM, but I'm into their roots, and their roots were really inspirational to me, because how they came out of France and how they were DJing at a lot of these illegal parties, and the way people raved about them before they were even on the radio. For me, that was inspirational, and also their artistry of animation and them as robots is another thing. So they are one of the exceptions I make when it comes to the poppy EDM. But let's get back to the rave culture and how it is now. You see, it's more legitimized, in my opinion, actually way more legitimized, and the festivals and nightclubs that hold these events, they're a lot safer and there's more security, yes, but I do miss the DIY aesthetic of what raves truly had before. Even though it wasn't the safest place, no doubt, but it had a lot of meaning to me, and it was a lot of fun, and that's how I began to make a lot of friends, because before I didn't have that many friends until I started going to raves, and I had a whole network of people that I met. A lot of the people I still talk to this day. So for me, electronic music is a journey. It's a never-ending journey. I mean, I'm always open to doing new things. Some of my songs I play acoustic guitar, or I use different sounds of different instruments, and I even do ambient music, dark ambient. And to me, a lot of this is thanks to the likes of Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, later on Juan Atkins and Frankie Knuckles, and I'm pretty sure there's plenty more to add to the list, but I'm just keeping it simple right now. And I do give a lot of thanks to those artists, because it has transcended into something really great that is still alive to this day and is still going strong. And even though, yeah, the rave culture isn't what it used to be, but maybe it's just evolving over time, like anything else, because, it wasn't as legitimate back then, yes. And a lot of it was because the music really wasn't in mainstream at that time, and a lot of people weren't used to seeing DJs perform or anything like that. And a lot of the reason why people go to festivals really isn't because of the DJs, and it's a lot like how the raves once were. People usually went there for the camaraderie and the party, and I understand that, but I think it's good that now that there are even more people coming for the music, and that's how it used to be in the beginning. And that is a very good thing, in my opinion, because, music is the core of this whole culture. It is. And there are different kinds of music, and this culture has, different kinds of cliques in it, such as Candy Kids, Junglists, and I am a true believer of PLUR, which is peace, love, unity, and respect. And I always went by that motto when I was in high school and even afterwards, because it has taught me how to be happy and to be grateful. And that's another thing about electronic music. It helps you have positive vibes, or it can help you with having positive vibes and having a positive outlook, because a lot of it's uppity, and and the message is peace, love, unity, respect, as I said. And I am a long time and die-hard raver to this day, and I'll always consider myself a raver. And that's all I got right now for this episode of Times with Kevin and Brandon. There will be a sequel to this episode in the near future, but in any case, I hope you enjoyed this podcast and hope you have a great day or a wonderful night, and thank you for being here with me. That is all.